So, it's been a long time since I've talked about my modding progress. I couldn't even tell you the last video I made. I don't know when I made it. It's been a long time. Um, but what I do know is that since that last update, I have done so much work with my mods. I've created a new map, which maybe some of you here don't even know about. So I want to show that off, and I want to show off some of the mods I've been working on for the last few months. But I also just kind of wanted to show off my progress across my different mods, starting with my first map, because some people watching this might not know that I've actually worked on 3 maps in total, and I have access to all 3 of those maps still. And I think it might be kind of fun to show off kind of how I started, why I switched to maybe a new map, and then maybe some other things that I'm working on in the next coming weeks. Some cool things that I want to show off here. So yeah, I figured with, as you can see on the screen here, 2,100 hours in Infusion, it might just be kind of fun to go down memory lane and look at some of the old stuff and explain what I worked on, and then working up to what I've got now. So without further ado, let's hop into my very first map I made for the Metro servers. So here it is. This is map number 1. This map was created back in the day when the Fallout mods started to die and they were being kind of banned left and right. They were being taken down. People were getting burnt out a little bit. And the server that I was a part of at the time was trying to figure out which kind of post-apocalyptic server sort of environment they wanted to have their entire community base around. And the 2 that kept coming up was Metro and Stalker. I'm not a huge Stalker fan, to be honest. Not that I don't like it or anything. I just never really played it growing up. And there were already a couple Stalker servers sort of in rotation within ARMA Reforger. So we were kind of voting on Metro. There are also votes to keep like a Fallout kind of version around. But while we were discussing what we wanted the server to be, I went into Infusion for the first time to see what you could make, and I showed off a tiny little demo of what I had created, and the server thought it was so cool that that was the reason we went to Metro. And I can actually show you where that is because I kept it in the map here. So this little section here of the tunnel was the very first thing I made. You'll notice there's some floating things here, and that's because the original prefabs became corrupt at some point, so I don't have access to like the train cars that were in here. So you will notice some bits floating around. But this was my very first introduction to Infusion. I didn't really know how to make tunnels. I didn't know how to import assets properly. I had tried to put a tunnel into the map, not realizing that you had to check off like the collider you wanted. And in fact, the tunnel I had added didn't even have a collider to begin with, so that never worked. So my solution was to grab these concrete pipes that exist in the game and scale them up to 14. And I figured that was kind of a cool solution. So I started to put a bunch of these little props around, like these are some retaining walls. I put some fire here, and then I turned the lighting down to show off the ambience. And with like the red lights I added, people saw this and they're like, holy, that's kind of cool. So from here, I started to work on various different stations. So these are like the minor stations here. I've also got these little areas, like these checkpoints people could hang out on top of. In here were the spawn points. So this is what every spawn looked like. It was just kind of like a train depot sort of thing. I use a lot of concrete blocks to create various pathways for people to get around. So these led up to the surface because we had a problem where if there were enemies on this side, maybe enemies on this side, they could spawn camp the people in here. So I gave them a way to go through a pipe to get up to the surface. So they would pop up right here. And I actually had to label off with the different factions. The actual map itself was very copy-paste, kind of like how it looks down here. You'll notice it's all the same concrete pipe running everywhere here. These are what the stations looked like back in the day. Very primitive. You'll see, just from me hovering around, these are all just separate blocks. And actually, if you look to the left, you can see the concrete pipe, 98,430. There were so many assets thrown into this map. I remember even people on really good hardware, they were getting maybe 40 FPS at any given point on this map. It was not very optimized. In fact, if we go up to the top again, the roads consist of just thousands and thousands of these concrete blocks that I've retextured. But I was really proud of this because I had never played around with Infusion. I played around with other engines way back in the day, so like Unity 3D and the Unreal Engine, but nothing to this capacity. So this is where I started to build these little train stations, again, just out of all these modular bits here. I've got all these rocks here blocking off the area because I didn't want like a coastline. As I progressed through the Metro mods, I kind of realized that going sort of down the GTA route of making like a fictional Moscow where there would be a coastline kind of made sense to me. And I feel like people do like that. But way back in the day, it was very restrictive. You'll actually see this is a tiny map by ARMA standards. This is basically like a battlefield-sized map. So on certain days where there are 100+ people in here, oh man, it struggled. The most popular place would probably have been this front line I had created. So this is very different from the front line in the actual game, but I just figured something a little different would be kind of cool. This is just like a exposed bridge here. I eventually expanded the front line to include this construction military checkpoint area. And it connects Red Line over here at Sportovnaya Station to Reich over at Chekhov Station, and then Polis, obviously, at Polis Station here. If we take a look over at Polis, I had created a library. So the newer library that you'll see in my last couple of maps was just a really basic prefab I'd created in Blender myself. But when I first started, I wasn't quite comfortable enough going into Blender. So again, this just consists of hundreds and hundreds of blocks here. But I think for what it was, and for how primitive things were back in the day, this was more than sufficient. This was before I had even known how to create items, so I wasn't doing anything like that. We were using RHS, and I was purely just building the map here. The first iteration of Polis is right here. So I think it looks pretty good. In fact, I actually still kind of love how this one looks. It wasn't as detailed as the current Polis. It's a little bit more restrictive, but I like all these little areas. We have these rooms here. So this was the council room and also the courthouse. We also had this market area here. And then below Polis, if I can find it, there was some secret areas. Yes, like right here. I had this lab. People like to hang out the lab here, because if you go through this little tunnel here, it would bring you into this water treatment plant, which used to have water, but again, things get corrupt over time. I was trying to move files back and forth to get this working back in the day when it broke, so some bits are missing, but this was a really popular place for people to fight. Way over here, we have the desert. So there used to be an outpost here. Before the Metro server this was designed for decided to switch over to a different IP, I had plans on making this into a massive airfield. Over here, we have a little forested area. the old server owners didn't like the idea of there being minor factions, or at least factions that weren't extremely prevalent across all the games. So Children of the Forest was one faction they didn't want, but I still figured making this camp here for maybe what the remnants of them would have been was just kind of cool. And people like to hang out here as well, I remember. So this was a popular place. Over here at the Volga, this was very popular. This might look familiar to some of you, and that's because of all of the mods I've worked on, of all the maps I've made, this prefab for the bridge has been just the legacy prefab for everything. This was the one when I had created back in the day. I don't know what I was thinking, but I had kept building it off of a single object. So if I click it, it's all a child of one block, like right here in the middle. And I realized while working on the new map that I could just drag it into one of the user folders and save it, and then just import it into a new map. So I'm pretty fond of this because it has really been with me since the very beginning. So it holds a near and dear place in my heart. And I'm glad that so many people like to hang out at it in the current map. But, I mean, looking at all of this took me several hundred hours to make. Even though it's really small, this was when I was still figuring things out, trying to learn how the engine worked. Again, down the tunnels, it was very basic. It was very janky, just looking around. Whoops. There we go. Very, very janky. This is what Market Station looked like. But I'm just so proud of it. I think it was just so cool. Working on this was so fun. But I learned so much off of this. I don't know if I would have continued working on further maps if this one hadn't run into problems. But basically what happened was after one of the more recent updates, I can't remember which one exactly, maybe 1.3 or 1.4 or something like that. It kept running into this strange JIP error. And normally what I've noticed in the most recent maps is a JIP error would be caused if you had something like a vehicle placed in here and then you tried uploading it. For whatever reason, Infusion doesn't like it if it finds like a vehicle you can drive, a dynamic vehicle, and it runs into the JIP error, which is telling you that it's trying to spawn something, but it can't quite pinpoint the location about where it should go, so it just shuts the server down. At least from my understanding, that's what I've interpreted from it. The strange thing is, there were no vehicles on this map when it was getting this JIP error. The only thing we can think of is when that massive update came out, it completely destroyed RHS. And it took RHS a little bit of time to get their mods sorted out to put it back onto the workshop safely. And after that had happened, this map was still running into a JIP error. And I think what might have been the problem is I use RHS as a dependency on this map. This was back before I understood how the dependencies work and how you can load them into maps and things like that. And there must have been leftover files somewhere in this map from the old RHS that was causing these issues. So you can technically load this map up in private scenarios, but the actual server itself can't handle it. So as a result, because of the downtime of the server that this was on, the staff there decided to move to the Stalker IP because it had a lot more established mods. There was really no waiting that had to happen. You could just swap out the map, swap out some of the assets, some of the gear mod packs and things like that, and the server would work. So for about 3 weeks to a month after that update, this map still hadn't been fixed, and that's when it was basically just sunsetted. But because of that, some of us moved over to a new server that we created ourselves called Metro Ascension, and that's the server that I primarily obviously mod on right now, and the one that I'm majorly a part of. So going from this to the second map was kind of crazy because I didn't like how restrictive this map was. I thought it was way too small. I didn't like the way the tunnels looked. I didn't like the way the surface looked, and I really hated the performance on the map because of all these bricks. So I'm going to jump over to the second map now and show you what that one looked like. So here we have the first Metro Ascension map. You'll notice right away that this map was vast. It was absolutely huge. If I just move around, you can see just how much scenery there was. There were multiple areas in the outskirts. There was this massive airfield here. You'll notice a track that runs around the entire island of this fake Moscow. And that's because with the size of this new map, the biggest thing that I created was an Aurora. So the actual train that spawns here in the harbor. This is where Tom's army was. And you could drive the train all the way around the map. It was very janky. I'll see if I can show you maybe if it's here. Oh, looks like it's gone. That's okay. Let's see if I can... There we go. So this is the Aurora. This train took so long to figure out. This was actually before I even knew how to make vehicles. So if I lift it up, you might be able to see if it's still here. Oh, maybe it's not visible. There was a car, just like a Sarka under this thing. And the Sarka is what stuck on these tracks and drove around. It wasn't very good, but it kind of worked. And that was probably the biggest, like, coolest gimmick I ever added to this map. It's a shame it didn't last very long because the major update, I think it was 1.5 maybe, or whichever one added like facial structure to bones, or like the bone structure to the face and everything. That broke this map as well. Again, it was a dependency issue, which shame on me for adding dependencies that were going to break the map. I'll explain what I've done in the third map to maybe explain how I was going to go about skirting those issues in the future. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, let's jump back to the main part of the city. I am still extremely proud of this map because the amount of detail in this is kind of insane. There are obviously other maps on the workshop that has cities, but just the scale of this is something I was really impressed with. A really funny thing about this map is it actually runs better than the first one because although it's something like, I think 8 times the size, I actually used Blender finally, and I created these massive panels here. And these panels are using a special texture which just mimics the material underneath them, which is why you'll see it looks like just part of the land here. And then what I did was I changed the LODs on them, so if you're from a distance, they render out a bit more, so the detail goes away. In fact, you'll see the high rises have it too, so if I zoom out, you'll see some of them start to break apart a little bit. And this is when I really learned how to use LODs to improve performance of this map. So it didn't run amazing. I'm not going to say it ran great, but I'm really happy with how much smoother this was compared to the first map. If we go down into the spawns, they were a little different from the first map. So rather than making them big train depots, they were just emptied out stations with big walls on them on either side here. And then you could jump over and get into the metro. And these were just indicators that you were at a spawn, basically. But, I mean, these tunnels here are such an improvement over the first one. I'm so happy with how these ones turned out. The tunnel shape itself, I found off of Sketchfab. And then I put in some custom textures, made some adjustments to it to accommodate things like openings and doors. I got these bits here with these junctions where they kind of cross each other. They intersect a little bit. I was able to add a bunch of checkpoints into everything here. I love this map because people got lost so frequently. The tunnel system in here is very vast. You'll see if I hop out of the tunnel itself. There's just tunnels everywhere. You'll see some tunnels are even like running underneath each other. So you didn't know if someone was above or below you when you were actually in the tunnel here. And they just went on for kilometers and kilometers. It was pretty absurd how far these went on for. One of the biggest issues with this map was maybe something that some of the GMs on the current server will recognize. These were sitting over these massive pits. So you'll notice the ground here isn't completely level, and that's because when I was designing it, I didn't quite know how I wanted the ground to work. So there's just these massive pits here. When you're in GM mode, if you're going down this tunnel here in GM, once you hit the bit where there's no more terrain, your camera will throw you down like this to the bottom. And it made it horrible trying to navigate in these tunnels here. I did work on various ways to fix it. I was leveling out little bits of the terrain everywhere, but it still just wasn't quite enough. But some of the locations I worked on here, I'm really proud of. This is Venice. I think Venice is amazing. It's massive. People hung out in here a lot. I made some adjustments to it, which unfortunately happened after the map or after the game update. So this part here, people didn't get to actually experience or play with. But I mean, they got to spend time in here, and I'm really proud of that. If we jump over to Polis right here, you can see this is where the library is. So again, this is what I mentioned before on the second map here. This is where I was a little bit more comfortable in Blender. Now, by no means is this a very good asset, but it worked. And I think for what it was decent. It worked pretty well. Polis was absolutely huge. This place here was the frame killer. Lots of people came in here and it would just destroy your frames. It was a beast. This is all one big prefab. It's just absolutely massive. But I'm really proud of this one as well. The case, again, I made it in Blender, threw it in here, so I had a base to go off of. This is where we've got these larger scale walls here looking down into different parts of the metro. So we have this kind of blocked off area, which leads over to the Reich territory. And again, this is where I started to play a lot more with the decorations. So I've got like prison camps here and all sorts of good stuff. This was something I was working on back in the day. These are the gallows, so you could actually hang people up there. For anyone watching this who's in the server, or maybe anyone who likes to play their own scenarios with my mods, the gallows are coming back. So don't worry, that will make a return at some point. What else was really unique about this? Oh, so actually, yeah, this is where I started to actually create stations. Now, I didn't model this whole thing. I found a Russian metro station model, and then I made some adjustments. So I made it so it was hollowed out. You could have interior inside of it. So I was able to furnish it a little bit here. It goes down into the station. So it did feel a little bit more seamless, honestly. Going from like real prefabs to another, you're not looking at like these custom blocks placed everywhere. It was a little bit distracting. The high rises were a really big thing people did like, however, they weren't great for performance, unfortunately. I've got the front line. Now, the front line wasn't this detailed when people were playing on it. Unfortunately, again, I wasn't able to show this to the community once I made it. So this was kind of for nothing. But I did learn some things here about furnishing things out, getting these walkways and things that I can use in the current map. So I'm not terribly upset that this wasn't really used for anything. But I mean, it was a lot of fun making it, so I'm not gonna complain too much. The cool thing about making maps is it doesn't really feel like you're working on something. It kind of feels like you're just painting, just working on some art, almost. This map is where I started to figure out how to actually make gear. So you'll notice I have Metro Ascension clothing down here. And this is where I started to make custom uniforms for people. I started to make custom guns for factions. I even started to use the Bacon Zombies to create custom Metro mutants. I was able to use a lot of the Zelix mods for looting, so there was looting all over the place here. In fact, there is an area over here called the Hansa Restricted Zone. So this was where a lot of the loot spawned, and this is where people could hang out in here, grab stuff. There were AI that spawned in here that would either shoot you or attack you, depending on what kind of AI they were. And I think overall, just the ambience, the terrain, the environment was just such a huge step up from the first map, obviously. I mean, it is vast. There was so much to explore. But it ran into kind of a funny problem, which a lot of like Ubisoft games run into. There's a lot of open space with nothing there. So the map was vast, but it was a little shallow. There wasn't a lot to see. Obviously, there were areas like this launch pad, which was kind of sick. There were little towns like right here. Here's the bridge that I mentioned. But people really hated dying. And I understand in, games like this, that's kind of a part of it. You die, you have to start over, you have to run back to where you were. It's not supposed to be, you die, you walk out of a room and you're face to face with people again. But the problem was, if you were in Hansa spawn and you wanted to get to Polis, my god, that was a long walk. It was like 10 minutes of walking. Now, keep in mind, if you're in Hansa and you want to meet up with like someone from Reich, that's a long walk. So there were some problems in that regard. Additional to that issue was also these tunnels. You'll notice they look better, but there's not a whole lot going on in here. It's just vast, empty space for just hundreds and hundreds of meters as you're running through here. So I started to experiment with a couple different gameplay loops. So here you'll notice there's like a big sulfur mine. And that's because I started to create little bits of loot where you could grab like sulfur. I found I had saltpeter you could grab, and then some scrap metal. And then you could come over here to this crafting bench and you could create AP ammo. You could create enhanced versions of guns. And that was a lot of fun for people. One issue, though, was because the performance was so low that having so much stuff spawning in here, paired with some of the other issues in the map at the time, it did cause people to crash quite a lot. So that wasn't super ideal for everyone. But that was just one of the ways that I was able to add a little bit more to do for people here. Now, similar to the first map, I probably never would have abandoned this map if it wasn't for the previous major update. I don't think... It might have been 1.6. I can't remember if that was the major update that broke it. It might have been. But there was a major update that completely destroyed mods just across the workshop, as I'm sure most of you watching this know. And the biggest thing that I did wrong with this map was I designed all of my mods to be dependencies of the map, and the map itself also acted as the core mod for this whatever server it was playing on. So when the dependencies in the core mod failed and then the core mod broke, it meant the map broke. I tried to remove these dependencies, and I'm sure some of you know what happened when this major update released, the workshop servers completely died. So the majority of people couldn't update or upload mods on the workshop if they were greater than like 500 megabytes. It would just time itself out after like a minute of uploading. Now, keep in mind, it's still a bit of a problem, but it's better than it was back at this point here. So because all these dependencies were running off of the map/core mod, even if I had unloaded those mods, those dependencies, one, it would have nuked so much out of the map here. So all the loot would have been gone, the shops would have broke, a lot of the gear probably would have broke as well. But the second issue was that the map itself was so big and so detailed and had so many custom assets and things inside of it that I couldn't publish an update. It just wouldn't work. I would get halfway through and it would fail. And that went on for about a month. So the server at the time was basically just dead at that point. I couldn't upload anything. I couldn't update anything at all. I realized that I could upload mods that were up to about 400 to 500 megabytes at the time. So about, I would say maybe 3 weeks after 1.6, I decided that I was going to completely redo the way I create my mods and actually make a brand new map. So let me show off what I've been working on for a while now. This is the first time I'm actually going to be showing it off in one of my videos, like officially. So I'm really excited about that. So this is my third map. This is the continuation of Metro Ascension. I think at the moment, this is probably my best attempt so far of any of my maps. And I'll explain why. You'll notice straight away that the city is much more compact compared to the previous map. I have fewer high rises. They're still here. What I did was, for the high rises that have a little bit less detail, I added those guys in, and then I created little walkways to get up so people can actually hang out on certain levels here and overlook the city. But just the amount of detail I was able to add with 1.6 is insane, because they introduced all these new apartments. So I was able to get rid of so many third-party assets, third-party mods. So things like the Eastern European buildings, Wolf Building Pack, I was able to get rid of all of that. And in fact, I think the best part about this map is it runs off of 0 dependencies. So theoretically, it should never run into problems. I was able to add a lot more iconic locations. So if I go to the top, you'll see the layout is a little bit more accurate to the game. So we've got Polis over here. If I actually open up the menu, you can see I have Venice marked here. I have the Kremlin. I have Moscow University over here. I've got the classic bridge. Whoops. The bridge here again. I've got the Botanical Garden. I've even got VDNKH over here, so I expanded the metro a little bit more north. And then I just found ways to add more detail to everything without compromising much of the performance. This runs better than the previous map, and if I go down into the tunnels, people were blown away when they went into the tunnel for the first time. These new tunnels are so much more detailed. And again, this is thanks to the 1.6 assets with the mines and everything. But just the amount of detail. Now, these aren't 100% vanilla. There are some bits in here I added. So, like, the tunnel shape itself is custom made by me. But then I have these metal hangers that run over them, which is cool because they have a like sound effect on them, so you can hear creaking metal down here, and that's just a vanilla thing off the prefab that's attached to it. But the amount of stuff I was able to throw in here. I was able to make the tunnels darker. Again, I had problems with the light probes back in the old maps, but it works so well in here because it's so much more compact. And there's just a lot more going on now. I'm really happy with it. Some of these little stations here I think look absolutely amazing. They're not quite accurate to like a real Russian station, but people seem to like them a lot. They're not super, you know, messy. They're not cluttered in a sense. They're not busy, I should say. They're pretty functionable. You'll notice one problem. It looks like there's sunlight down there. That's just an issue with the probes, which I'm still trying to figure out. You'll also see some bits here kind of floating a little bit. But that's not really a problem. That's really easy to fix. So, you know, I'll get that sorted out still. I'm working on some stuff, so, you know, of course I'll run into some of these issues from time to time. But it is what it is. Overall, I think this is just such an upgrade. If we go down into Polis, you'll see the new Polis. So here we go. It's still a massive, massive, massive station, but it's just a little bit more compact. It performs a little bit better than the other one, but the spirit is still there, I think. As you'll see, there's bits that are kind of weird still. Still a work in progress. But some of the other areas I was able to add, I think are really cool. So we have like the Polis bar up here. If we go down, you'll see it's flooded down the middle where the trains go. But in the corner here, we've got like a council room for people to meet in. The other stations that are actually unique would also be like Market Station, for example. So we have Market Station here. We'll go down to it. As soon as I can find it. Here we go. So Market Station is also custom. You'll actually see that the way down here, it's kind of dark, but that also just kind of works. Lot more fortified. Some of the spawns are really cool. So the way you get to Market Station from their spawn is to actually run through this destroyed warehouse, which goes into this broken wall here. But on that topic of the spawns, this is what the new spawns look like for every faction. Mostly every faction, with the exception of a couple. So we have the vehicle spawners here. So I'm just using the shop system. This is the very first custom vehicle I made for Metro. So it's like that Jeep that you find in the game. I've used supplies as currency. So I have global supply usage turned on, and you can actually pull them out of your supply boxes here, and you can trade people. Now, for the longest time, there wasn't a big reason to use supplies because everyone had supplies and trading didn't last because obviously when the server restarted, you would lose your supplies. But with the most recent update coming out, I've added Zelix persistent storage. And I've lowered the volume and the weight of the storage boxes you can add, so factions can fill up this locker here as like a shared communal storage for themselves. And I think this is going to open up a lot of trading opportunities for people who can now persistently save the currency with their factions. It's not perfect because obviously this is kind of more of going down the communist route of factions sharing their supplies together. But I think this is going to be a really, really good start for people to really open up some trading opportunities. Let's see. Oh, one place I really love is Lubyanka. So this is Redline's station here. So they have, again, multiple fences here, just like the other stations do. But one thing I really love is if you go up their staircase, where Polis had their bar, Redline has a little obstacle course kind of thing going on over here. But below, we have this for them. So this is where their leader can speak to people. And at the end of the station, we have a tiny theater. The theater is really cool because I've seen people do like comedy nights here. So that's a lot of fun to see. I think they've done executions there, but you know, that's neither here nor there. We've also got Reich territory over here. Actually, you know what? Let's not go to the spawn, we'll go to Chekhov Station. Chekhov Station, similar to Red Line. They've got a podium here for their leader to talk to their people down here. They've got a prison camp here, which I think is very, very cool. And then a really cool thing. Oh, there we go. As you'll see, the probes are sometimes a little bit buggy, but that is what it is. The thing that's really cool, though, is... Oh my gosh. I gotta fix that, maybe. One thing that's really, really cool is Reich and Red Line have the front line again. So this front line is just massive. You'll see it's a little bit weird because there's probes kind of blocking off certain bits, which I am trying to work on more. But the amount of detail in here, I think, is just really, really cool. There's so much going on. And then one thing I really love, too, is down here leads into this really dark area. Don't worry about these artifacts. It's not that bad when you're actually in the game. Just when I'm zooming around in Infusion, it's a little buggy. So it's not going to be blinking like this. But that tunnel leads you all the way over to Polis. Over here, we have Emerald City. We have the HRZ. So I kind of styled it off of like Pripyat from the Stalker games because I thought it'd be kind of fun. You'll notice landmine symbols, so there are landmines across the map you have to be careful for. And you'll also see something here. And that's because I've added static spawns back to the mutants. So we have these bears. They're kind of goofy, kind of cute, but we got these big bears here. In the Hansa restricted zone, I actually also have Hansa AI. Hansa AI are really cool because if Hansa walks up to them, they can tell them to join their squad, and then the AI will follow them around, so that's really cool. Down in here, I believe this is a water treatment facility. We've got Nasalises that run around. These goofy little monsters. Over here on the surface, more Nasalises. Now, obviously, they wouldn't normally be on the surface, but that is what it is. I got Humanimals. I've got Arachnids as well. A little goofy, but I think they're alright. And then, of course, in certain areas around the map, we have these Stalkers that run around. So the Stalkers will engage the mutants and other players, obviously. So there's a lot that goes on out here. One thing I didn't mention about the previous two maps is there is also invisible gas. So that's courtesy of the GM effects mod. So if you walk onto the surface in certain areas without a gas mask, it will start to kill you. So you do need your gas mask. But I'm just really happy with the amount of detail that's in here. I am working on more. Over here, you'll see it's pretty empty. But this area here, I don't want to show it off because this is something I'm working on right now. I've been teasing to the server. But this is the introduction of the first raid to the map. So in here, what I will show is if I go over to this side, there's multiple levels of these missile silos that go down deeper into this mountain. And as they go down, they're going to get more difficult. There's going to be more AI. I have traps set up. I have puzzles and things I'm working on. But there's going to be good loot in here. I'm currently working on 11 new guns, custom guns for this area here. I'm working on other items, other equipment, things like that. I don't want to share too much. But there's also anomalies down here. So I have the electric anomalies that hang out in certain areas, and they will hurt you if you go near. I don't want to get too close to show off, you know, I don't want to spoil too much in here. But we go down here to this area, you can see some of the electric anomalies. These guys don't move, but you know, what's to say that in the future maybe they will move. So I think those are just really cool. But yeah, this is a really big project I'm working on. Cool thing in here, I have remote door buttons, so you have to go to different rooms to open up doors from across, you know, maybe the section you're in. I have a really basic electrical grid that I'm working on, so you'll need to actually like turn on ceiling lights using certain control panels. But the one thing that is absolutely blowing some people's mind right now is this. I figured out how to make a working elevator in the game here. So we're just gonna spawn an AI here. And the UI is weird, it says open or close, but it's because I'm using a custom sliding door. But if you press it, you can actually see that the elevator goes down. So I am so freaking excited about this. I think this is gonna be really cool for people to experience, because let's be real, like, how often do you see elevators in ARMA? I'm putting these everywhere in here. I want people to use these things a bunch. They're a little janky. You can only have a couple people on it before it starts to weigh down, so that's just one thing that people will have to kind of keep in mind. But I mean, just the fact that it's working at all is kind of crazy. If I shoot it, there's actual collision on it. So if you're being shot somewhere, you can actually duck down behind these and use them as cover, which I think is really, really sweet. Some of the other things I've been working on is things like food systems. So I was using the metabolism mod by ben.obj because I think that's probably the best one. It shows if you're sick, it shows if you've been, you know, wounded, if you're bleeding, and things like that. And I think it just has a really robust system for the server. So I use Zealot's loot to create little areas like this in the botanical garden, where some of the shrimp spawn. In the corners, there's these shrimp eggs, and you can take these eggs into Polis, and you can actually exchange them for food. I have various different types of food. If you actually go to the bridge I've mentioned a couple times here, there's a fishing area, and you'll see fish will spawn where I have this little fishing area. So you can take the fish, again, to Polis and get some food. And I can actually show you what that looks like. If we... Whoops, we're not going to go there. That's their spawn. We're going to go into Polis itself. And I'll go up to the bar here. And I have just this little menu area here with different types of ways of buying it. So I have the shrimp egg that's cracked open. I have a mushroom soup. You'll see the mushrooms are actually glowing. I've got fish soup here. And then I'm also working on some custom beverages for every faction. But these are all going to be different ways to start to have more to do around the server. So over at VDNKH, there's a really basic mushroom farm that people can access. Let's see, we have these little mushroom farm here. These little glowing mushrooms. So it's walled off a little bit, so intruders can't just go in there and grab them. But VDNKH can obviously protect these if they see fit. And over here, it's a little dark. Don't know why the lights aren't working. But they have little checkpoints and things in here as well. What else is in the map? This area here is actually a second mini metro. So if you go down, there's actually another tiny metro that not a lot of people really know about. So you can go down there. This is an area where pretty much anything goes. People can fight as much as they want. There's nothing really going on over there. Here, this park is where Children of the Forest spawn. And a lot of people are really excited about this area. I think it's so cool. They were a little bit neglected in previous servers, previous maps. So I think giving them this entire park here basically is their territory, plus this area here, which is actually an imported prefab from the previous map, was just a really cool way to give them something cool. There's even like this little rally area for them to hang out at. Way to the south, we have Tom's army. So they spawn at the harbor here. And then some of the cool things that I want to show off as well would be like gear. So there's a lot of gear. Obviously, it's not the best because I'm juggling so many things, and I'm not like an experienced animator by any means. But I'm pretty excited and I'm pretty proud to show off the list of all this stuff in here. So we have a bunch of different things. We have a bunch of different types of gear, clothing for the factions. It's obviously custom for everyone, so I'm just showing off Tom's army here. But every faction should have at least 2 uniform versions. And then they each have a list of their custom guns. So you see here I have like a Stallion. We have M4s and SR1. We have the Sammy here. Other factions like Redline, for example, have different versions of a Mosin. Reich has an STG. Hansa has a really cool Groza that I like. They also have a Sega that fires Dragon Breath rounds, which is really cool. But I also want to show off the supply system here. So that's where Tom's army's locker is. So open this up. It has supplies. It starts at about 1,000 and it accumulates slowly over time. So we're going to transfer those supplies over. We'll go to the PMC Jeep. We'll spawn it. And this is my custom Jeep. Not perfect, not animated really. It's also a little bumpy. The collisions on it aren't amazing. But I think this, for just like a basic little thing I was working on, I think this is super, super cool. There's different areas for people to sit in, so obviously they have the gun, but the passengers can also sit on either side like this, which I think is really neat. Just like that. I also have a Panzer for Reich, and then like a Redline BTR type tank, so the two of them can fight with their custom tanks. What else am I working on? Oh my god, there's so much. But this is definitely the most vast. The reason that I was able to make all of this is rather than having just, you know, one massive mod pack like I did in the previous map, I've broken things up into various mods. So I have multiple gear mods that get packaged together into the core mod. I have a separate vehicle mod. My core mod is separate. Everything is finally separated, which maybe makes it a little bit more annoying for people to find mods, because rather than the 2 that I ran in the previous map, I now have like 8 or 9. They're the same size. So this entire mod pack with everything in it is like 6 gigs only, so it's pretty small. But this just makes it so much easier for me to fix things, to upload things, because it's all smaller bite-sized packages. God forbid something happens to the dependencies that are on my core mod, I can just nuke the core mod and then basically re-upload it without any dependencies. It would remove some of the core features of the map, but the map itself will always work. No dependencies, so I'm very happy about that. I don't know why it took so long for me to learn my lesson, but I'm really happy with the place that the mods are in right now. Everything runs really well. People like the guns. A lot of the systems are enjoyable for people. I'm really looking forward to seeing people storing their supplies to actually have a bit of a economy finally set up here. Again, it's not like a personal economy, it's more like a communist kind of economy. But we're in Russia, so, you know, it is what it is. But, yeah, a ton of work has been put into these mods over the last 2 years. Over 2,000 hours spent in here. But I'm really happy with it. I'm really proud of the work I've done. Now, obviously, these mods are designed to all work together, so if you download the Metro Core mod, you should theoretically have to download everything with it. So if you didn't want to play in the server, you can load up your own private scenarios with friends to check it out. It should be really easy to do. The core mod has all the dependencies running into it. So yeah, if you've never checked it out, I'd be really happy if you did. Just let me know what you think about it. I think there's been a lot of good progress. People are surprised at how much has been done by more or less one person. Keep in mind, like, obviously, I've had a lot of help. So I've had Golden from our server help me out with a lot of stuff. In fact, he just added some really cool guns. So he has like an M60 and different like PKM versions and a really cool like 3-burst pistol. So he's been working on some cool stuff, and I've had that added in here as well, which is really nice. Guardian, Jacob, they've helped a ton as well with a couple things, getting me assets, creating different clothing, weapon options, prop things like environmental props. So there's been a little bit of help, but just, I mean, even then, the amount of work we've done with like a max of 5 people, I think is really cool. So yeah, I've been yapping for a long time. I think that's all I wanted to talk about. Really excited for people to take a look at some of this stuff. I'm really excited to show off some of the things that I'm going to be completing, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. Progress is slow, but progress is still progress. So yeah, come check it out. Maybe download it, take a look, play around a little bit. Let me know what you think. And yeah, that's about everything. See you later, guys.